Chapter 4. 28 months earlier, Saturday, April 12, 1975. The helicopter, a plush, luxurious appointed Bell Jet Ranger 2 chopper, chopped up the dry Nevada air and flung it down at the Las Vegas Strip. The pilot gingerly approached the landing pad on the roof of the Fortunata Hotel, hovered over the red target circle for a moment, then put down with consummate skill. As the rotor stopped churning overhead, Ogden Salisbury slid open his door and stepped out onto the hotel roof. For a few seconds he was disorientated. The cabin of the Jet Ranger had been air-conned. Out here, the air was like a parching gust from a furnace. A Frank Sinatra album was playing on a stereo, blasting forth from speakers mounted on 6-foot poles. Sunlight reflected from rippling water in the rooftop pool, and Salisbury was partially blinded in spite of his sunglasses. Somehow he had expected the roof to bubble and sway under him as the helicopter had done, and when it did not, he staggered lightly. The swimming pool and the glass water recreation room beside it was adjunct of the enormous 13th-floor presidential suite of the Fortuna Hotel. This afternoon, there was only 2 people using it, a pair of voluptuous young women in skimpy white string bikinis. They were sitting on the edge of the pool, near the deep end, dangling their legs in the water. A squat, powerful-built man in grey slacks and a short-sleeved white silk shirt was hunkered down beside them, talking to them. All 3 had the perfect nonchalance that, Ogden thought, came only with power or money. They appeared not even to have noticed the arrival of the helicopter. Salisbury crossed the roof to them. General Klinger? The squat man looked up at him. The girls didn't seem to know that he existed. The blonde had begun to lather the brunette with tanning lotion. Her hands lingered on the other girl's calves and knees, then inched lovingly along her taut brown thighs. Obviously, they were more than just good friends. My name's Salisbury. Klinger stood up. He didn't offer to shake hands. I've got one suitcase. Be with you in a minute. He walked back towards the glass-walled recreation room. Salisbury stared at the girls. They had the longest, loveliest legs he had ever seen. He cleared his throat and said, I'll bet you're in show business. Neither of them looked at him. The blonde squeezed lotion into her left hand and massaged the swelling tops of the brunette's large breasts. Her fingers trailed under the bikini bra, flicked across the hidden nipples. Salisbury felt like a fool, as he always had around beautiful women. He was certain that they were making fun of him. You stinking bitches, he thought vicariously. Someday I'll have any of you I want. Someday I'll tell you what I want, and you'll do it. And you'll love it, because I'll tell you to love it. Klinger returned, carrying one large suitcase. He had put on a $200 blue and grey plaid sports coat. Looks like a gorilla dressed up for a circus act, Salisbury thought. In the passenger's compartment of the helicopter, as they lifted away from the roof, Klinger pressed his face to the window and watched the girls dwindle into sexless specks. Then he sighed and sat back and said, Your boss knows how to arrange a man's vacation. Salisbury blinked in confusion. My boss? Glancing at him, Klinger said, Dawson. He took a packet of cherry roots from inside coat pocket. He fished out one and lit it for himself without offering one to Salisbury. What did you think of Crystal and Daisy? Salisbury took off his sunglasses. What? Crystal and Daisy, the girls at the pool. Nice, very nice. Pausing for a long drag of his cheroot, Klinger blew out smoke and said, You wouldn't believe what those girls can do. I thought they were dancers, Salisbury said. Klinger looked at him disbelievingly and then threw back his head and laughed. Oh, they are. They dance their little asses off every night in the Fortunata's main showroom, but they've also been performing in the penthouse suite. And let me tell you, dancing is the least of their talents. Salisbury was perspiring, even though the cabin of the Jet Ranger was full of women. He feared them and wanted them desperately. To Dawson, mind control meant unlimited wealth, a financial stranglehold on the entire world. To Klinger, it might mean unrestricted power, the satisfaction of unquestionable command. But to Salisbury, it meant having sex as often as he wanted it, in as many ways as he wanted it, with any woman he desired. Blowing smoke at the cabin ceiling, Klinger said, I'll bet you'll like having the 2 in your bed, shoving in them one after the other. Would you like that? Who wouldn't? They're hard on a man, Klinger said, chuckling. Takes a man with real stamina to keep them happy. You think you could handle both Crystal and Daisy? I could give it a try. Klinger laughed loudly. Salisbury hated him for that. This crude bastard was nothing more than an influence peddler. Ogden thought he could be bought, and his pride was cheap. In one way or another, he helped Futurex International in its competitive bidding for Pentagon contracts. In return, he took free vacations in Las Vegas, and some sort of stipend was paid into a Swiss bank account. There was only one element of this arrangement that Salisbury was unable to reconcile with Leonard Dawson's personal philosophy. He said to Klinger, "Does Leonard pay for the girls too?" "Well, I don't. I've never had to pay for it." He stared hard at Salisbury until he was convinced that the scientist believed him. "The hotel picks up the tab. That's one of Futurex subsidiaries. But both Leonard and I pretend he doesn't know about the girls. Whenever he asks me how I enjoyed a vacation, he acts as if I've done it is sit around the pool by myself reading the latest books." He was amused. He sucked on his cheroot. "Leonard is a Puritan, but he knows better than to let his personal feelings interfere with business." He shook his head. "Your boss is some man." "He's not my boss," Salisbury said. Klinger didn't seem to have heard him. "Leonard and I are partners," Salisbury said. Klinger looked up and down. "Partners? That's right." Their eyes met. Reluctantly, after a few seconds, Salisbury looked away. "Partners," Klinger said. He didn't believe it. "We are partners," Salisbury thought. "Dawson may own this helicopter, the Fortunata Hotel, Crystal, Daisy and you, but he doesn't own me, and he never will. Never." At the Las Vegas airport, the helicopter put down 30 yards from a dazzling white Grumman Gulfstream jet. Red letters on the fuselage spelled Futurex International. 15 minutes later, they were airborne, on their way to an exclusive landing strip near Lake Tahoe. Klinger unbuckled his seatbelt and said, "I understand you're to give me a briefing." "That's right. We've got 2 hours for it." He put his briefcase on his lap. "Have you ever heard of subliminal? Before get going, like a scotch on the rocks. I believe there's a bar aboard." "Fine, just fine. It's back there." Salisbury gestured over his shoulder. Klinger said, "Make mine 4 ounces of scotch and 4 ice cubes in an 8-ounce glass." At first Salisbury gazed at him uncomprehendingly. Then he got it. Generals don't mix their own drinks. Don't let him intimidate you, he thought. Against his will, however, he found himself getting up and moving towards the back of the plane. It was as if he were not in control of his body. When he returned with the drink, Klinger didn't even thank him. "You say you're one of Leonard's partners." Salisbury realized that by acting more like a waiter than a host, he had only reinforced the general's conviction that the word partner did not fit him. The bastard had been testing him. He began to wonder if Dawson and Klinger were too much for him. Was he a bantam in a ring with heavyweights? He might be setting himself up for a knockout punch. He quickly dismissed that thought. Without Dawson and the general, he could not keep his discoveries from the government, which had financed them and owned them, and would be jealous of them if he knew that they existed. He had no choice but to associate with these people, and he knew he would have to be cautious, suspicious, and watchful. But a man could safely make his bed with the devil so long as he slept with a loaded gun under his pillow, couldn't he? Pine House, the 25-room Dawson mansion that overlooked Lake Tahoe, Nevada, had won 2 design awards for its architect and then featured in-house beautiful. It stood at the water's edge on a 5-acre estate with a backdrop of more than 100 towering pine trees, and it seemed to rise naturally from the landscape rather than intrude upon it. Even though its lines were quite modern, the first level was large, circular, of stone and without windows. The second story, a circle the same size as, but not concentric to the first level, was a step up from the ground floor. Lakeside, at the back of the house, the second story overhung the first, sheltering a small boat dock, and here there were a 12-foot-long window that provided a magnificent view of the water and the distant pine-covered slopes. The dome-shaped black slate roof was crowned with a slender needle-like 8-foot spire. When he first saw the place, Salisbury thought that it was a cousin to the futuristic church that had been rising in wealthy and progressive parishes over the last 10 or 15 years. Without a thought for tact, he had said as much, and Leonard had taken the comment as a compliment, having been refamiliarized with his host's eccentricities during their weekly meetings over the past 3 months. Ogden was fairly certain that the house was supposed to resemble a church, that Dawson meant for it to be a temple, a holy monument to wealth and power. Pine House had cost nearly as much as a church, $1.5 million, including the price of the land. Nevertheless, it was only one of 5 houses and 3 large apartments that Dawson and his wife maintained in the United States, Jamaica, England, and Europe. After dinner, the 3 men reclined in easy chairs in the living room, a few feet from the picture window Tahoe, one of the highest and deepest lakes in the world, shimmering with light and shadow, as the last rays of the sun, already gone behind the mountains, drained from the sky. In the morning the water had a clear greenish cast. By afternoon it was a pure crystalline blue, now soon to be as black as a vast spill of oil. It was like purple velvet folded softly against the shoreline. For 5 or 10 minutes they enjoyed the view, speaking only to remark on the meal they had just finished and on the brandy they were sipping. At last Dawson turned to the General and said earnestly, "What do you think of subliminal advertising?" The General had anticipated this abrupt shift from relaxation to business. "Fascinating stuff. You have no doubts that it exists?" "None whatsoever. Your man here has the proof." "But he didn't explain what subliminal advertising has to do with me." Sipping brandy soberingly, Dawson nodded towards Salisbury, putting down his own drink, angry with Klinger for referring to him as Dawson's man, and angry with Dawson for not correcting the General, reminding himself not to address Klinger by his military title. Ogden said for Ernest, "We never met until this morning. I've never told you where I work, but I'm sure you know." "The Brockett Institute," Klinger said without hesitation. General Ernst Klinger supervised a division of the Pentagon's vitally important Department of Security for weapons research. His authority within the department extended to the state of Ohio, West Virginia, Maryland, Delaware, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. It was his responsibility to choose, oversee the installation of, and regularly inspect the traditional analytical systems that protected all laboratories, factories, and test sites where weapons research was conducted within those 14 states. Several laboratories belonging to Creative Development Associates, including the Brockett facility in Connecticut, came under his jurisdiction, and Salisbury would have been surprised if the General had not known the name of the scientist in charge of the work at Brockett. "Do you know what sort of research we're conducting up there?" Salisbury asked. "I'm responsible for the security, not the research," Klinger said. "I only know what I need to know, like the background of the people who work there, the layout of the building, and the nature of the surrounding countryside. I don't need to know about your work. It has to do with subliminals." Stiffening as if he had sensed stealthy movement behind him, some of the brandy-inspired colour seeped from his face. Klinger said, "I believe you've signed a secrecy pledge, like everyone else at Brockett." "Yes, I have." "You just now violated it. I'm aware of that." "Are you aware of the penalty?" "Yes, but I'll never suffer it." "You're sure of yourself, aren't you?" "Damn sure," Salisbury said. "It makes no difference, you know, that I'm a general in the United States Army, or that Lena is a loyal and trusted citizen. You've still broken the pledge. Maybe they can't put you away for treason. You've only talked to the likes of us, but they can at least give you 18 months for declassifying information without the authority to do so." Salisbury glanced at Dawson. Leaning forward and in his chair, Dawson patted the General's knee. "Let Ogden finish," Klinger said. This could be a setup." "A what?" "A setup, a trap. To get you," Dawson asked. "Could be." "What would I want to set you up?" "Why would I want to set you up?" Dawson asked. He seemed genuinely hurt by the suggestion, in spite of the fact Salisbury thought that he probably set up and destroyed hundreds of men over the last 30 years. Klinger seemed to be thinking the same thing, although he shrugged and pretended that he had no answer to Dawson's question. "That's not the way I operate," Dawson said, either unable or unwilling to conceal his bruised pride. "You know me better than that. My whole career, my whole life is based on Christian principles. I didn't know anyone well enough to risk a charge of treason," the General said gruffly, feigning exasperation. It was a bit too obvious to be real. Dawson said, "Old friend, we've made a great deal of money together, but all of it amounts to pocket change when compared to the money we can make if we cooperate with Ogden. This is literally unlimited wealth here for all of us." He watched the General for a moment, and when he could get no reaction, he said, "Furness, I have never misled you. Never. Not once." "I'm convinced," Klinger said. "All you ever did before was pay me for advice, for your influence." "For my advice," Klinger insisted. "And even if I did sell my influence, which I didn't, there's a long way from treason." They stared at each other. Salisbury felt as if he were in the room with them, as if he were watching them from the eyepiece of a mile-long telescope, with less of an eye to his voice than there had been a minute ago, Klinger finally said. I Leonard, I suppose you realise that I could be setting you up, of course. I could agree to hear your man out, listen to everything he has to say, only to get evidence against you and him. String us along. Give you enough rope to hang yourself, Klinger said. I only warn you because you're a friend. I like you. I don't want to see you in trouble. Dawson settled back in his chair. Well, I've an offer to make you, and I need your cooperation. So I'll just have to take that risk, won't I? That's your choice. Smiling, apparently pleased with the general, Dawson raised his brandy glass and silently proposed a toast. Grinning broadly, Klinger raised his own glass. What in the hell's going on here? Salisbury wondered. When he had sniffed and sipped his brandy, Dawson looked at Salisbury for the first time in several minutes and said, You may proceed, Ogden. Suddenly Salisbury grasped the underlying purpose of the conversation to which he had just listened. In the unlikely event that Dawson actually was setting a trap for the old friend, on the off chance that the meeting was being taped, Klinger had deftly provided himself with at least one protection against successful prosecution. He was now on record as having warned Dawson about the consequences of his actions. In court or before a military review board, the general could argue that he had only been playing along with them in order to collect evidence against them, and even if no one believed him, he more than likely would manage to retain both his freedom and his rank. Ogden got up, leaving his brandy glass behind him, went to the window and stood with his back to the darkened lake. He was too nervous to sit still while he talked. Indeed, for a few seconds he was too nervous to speak at all, like a pair of lizards perched half in warm sunlight and half in chilly shadows, waiting for the light balance to change enough to warrant movement. Dawson and Klinger watched him. They were sitting in identical high-backed black leather easy chairs with burnished silvery buttons and studs. A small round cocktail table with a dark oak top stood between them. The only light in the richly furnished room came from two floor lamps that flanked the fireplace 20 feet away. The right side of each man's face was softened and somewhat concealed by shadows, while the left side was starkly detailed by amber lights, and their eyes blinked with serene patience. Whether or not the scheme was a success, Salisbury thought, both Dawson and Klinger would come through it unscathed. They both wore effective armour, Dawson his wealth, Klinger his truth, ruthlessness, cleverness, and experience. However, Salisbury didn't possess any armour of his own. He hadn't even realised, as Klinger had, when he projected himself with a spiel about secrecy, pledges, and treason, that he might need it. He had assumed that his discovery would generate enough money power to satisfy all three of them, but he had just begun to understand that greed could not be sated as easily as a hearty appetite or a demanding thirst. If he had any defensive weapon at all, it was his intelligence, his lightning-quick mind, but his intellect had been directed for so long into narrow channels of specialized scientific inquiry that it is now served him far less well in the common matters of life than it did in the laboratory. Be cautious, suspicious, and watchful, he reminded himself for the second time that day. With men as aggressive as these, caution was a damn thin armour, but it was the only one he had. He said, for 10 years the Broca Institute had been fully devoted to clinical study of subliminal advertising. We haven't been interested in the technical, theoretical, or sociological aspect of it. That work is being done elsewhere. We've been concerned solely with the biological mechanism of subliminal perception. From the start, we have been trying to develop a drug that will prime the brain for subsession, a drug that will make a man obey without question every subliminal directive that's given to him. Scientists at another CDA laboratory in Northern California were trying to engineer a viral or bacterial agent for the same purpose, but they were in the wrong track. He knew that for a fact because he was on the right one. Currently, it's possible to use subliminals to influence people who have no unshakable opinions about a particular subject or product, but the Pentagon wants to be able to use subliminal messages to alter the fundamental attitudes of people who do have strong, stubborn, held opinions. Mind control, Klinger said matter-of-factly. Dawson took another sip from his brandy glass. If such a drug can be synthesized, the rest of it will change the course of history. That's no exaggeration. For one thing, there will never again be war, not in the traditional sense. We will simply contaminate our enemies' water supplies with the drugs, then inundate them through their own media, television, radio, motion pictures, newspaper, and magazines with a continuing series of carefully structured subliminals that will convince them to see things that way. Gradually, subliminally, we can transform our enemies into our allies and let them think that the transformation was their own idea. They were silent for perhaps a minute, thinking about it. Klinger lit a cheroot. Then he said, there would also be a new number of domestic uses for a drug like that. Of course, Salisbury said. At long last, Dawson said almost wistfully, we could achieve national unity, put an end to all the bickering and protest and disagreement that's holding back this great country. Ogden turned away from them and stared through the window. Night had fully claimed the lake. He could hear the water lapping at the boat docks, piling a few feet below him. Just below the glass, he listened and allowed the rhythmic sound to calm him. He was certain now that Klinger would cooperate, and he saw the incredible future that lay before him, and he was so excited by the vision that he did not trust himself to speak. To his back, Klinger said, you're primarily the director of research at Brockett, but apparently you're not just a test man. There are certain lines of study I've reserved for myself, Salisbury admitted, and you've discovered a drug that works, a drug that primes the brain for subception. 3 months ago, Ogden said to the glass. Who knows about it? The three of us. No one at Brockett? No one. Even if you have, as you say, reserved some line of study for yourself, you must have a lab assistant. He's not all that bright, Salisbury said. That's why I chose him 6 years ago. Klinger said, you were thinking about taking the discovery for yourself all that long ago. Yes. You've doctored your daily work record, the form that go to Washington at the end of every day. I only had to falsify them for a few days. As soon as I saw what I had come upon, I stopped working on it at once and changed the entire direction of my research. And your assistant didn't figure the switch. He thought I'd given up on the avenue of research and was ready to try another. I told you he's not terribly clever. Dawson said, Ogden hasn't perfected this drug of his, Ernest. There's still a great deal of work to be done. How much work? The general asked. Turning from the window, Salisbury said, I'm not absolutely certain. Perhaps as little as 6 months or as much as a year and a half. He can't work on it at Brockett, Dawson said. He couldn't possibly get away and falsify his records for such a length of time. Therefore, I'm putting together a completely equipped laboratory for him in my house in Greenwich, 40 minutes from the Brockett Institute. Raising his eyebrow, Klinger said, you've got a house so big you can turn it into a lab? Ogden doesn't need a great deal of room, really. 1,000 square feet, 1,100 at the outside, and most of that will be taken up with computers. Hideously expensive computers. I might add, I'm backing Ogden with nearly $2 million of my own money, Ernest. That's an indication of the tremendous faith I have in him. You really think he can develop, test, and perfect this drug in a jerry-built lab? $2 million is hardly jerry-built, Dawson said. And don't forget that billions of dollars worth of preliminary research has already been paid for by the government. I'm financing just the final stage. How can you possibly maintain secrecy? There are thousands of uses for the computer system. We won't be incriminating ourselves just by pursuing it. Furthermore, we'll reinsure it through one of future subsidiaries. There won't be any record that it will be sold to us. There won't be any questions asked, Dawson said. You need lab technicians, assistants, clerks. No, Dawson said, so long as Ogden has a computer and a complete data file of his past research, he can handle everything himself. For 10 years, he's had a full lab staff to do the drudgery, but most of that kind of work is behind him now. If he quits at Brockett, Klinger said, there will be an exhaustive security investigation. They'll want to know why he quit, and they'll find out. They were talking about Salisbury as if he were somewhere else and unable to hear them, and he didn't like that. He moved away from the window and took 2 steps towards the general and said, I'm not leaving my position at Brockett. I'll report for work as usual, 5 days a week from 9 to 4. While I'm there, I'll labour diligently on a useful research project. When will you find time to work at this lab Leonard's setting up for you? In the evening, Salisbury said, and on weekends. Besides that, I've accumulated a lot of sick leave and vacation time. I'll take most of it, but I'll spread it out evenly over the next year or so. Klinger stood up and went to the elegant copper and glass file cart that a servant had left a few feet from the easy chairs. His thick and hairy arms made the crystal decanters look more delicate than they actually were. As he poured another double shot of brandy for himself, he said, and what role do you see me playing in all of this? Salisbury said, Leonard can get the computer system I need, but he can't provide me with a magnetic tape file of all the research I've done for CDA or set of master program tapes designed for my research. I'll need both of them. Those before Leonard's computers are worth a penny to me. Now, given 3 or 4 weeks, I could make duplicates of those tapes at Brockhurst without much risk of being caught. But once I've got 80 or 90 Cumberson mag tapes and 500-yard printouts, how do I get them out of Brockhurst? There's just no way. Security procedures entering and leaving are too tight for my purpose, unless I see, Kling said. He returned his chair and sipped at his brandy, sliding forward to the edge of his seat. Dawson said, Ernest, you're the ultimate authority for security at Brockett. You know more about the system than anyone else. If there's a weak spot in the security, you're the man to find it or make it. Studying Salisbury as if he was assessing the danger and questioning the wisdom of being associated with someone of such obvious inferior character. Klinger said, I'm supposed to let you smuggle out nearly 100 magnetic tapes full of top secret data and sophisticated computer programs. Ogden nodded slowly. Can you do it? Dawson asked. Probably. That's all you can say. There's a better than even chance it can be done. That's not sufficient, Ernest. All right, Klinger said, slightly exasperated. I can do it. I can find a way. Smiling, Dawson said, I knew you could. But if I did find a way and was caught, either during or after the operation, I'll be dumped into Leavenworth and left to rot. Earlier, when I used the word treason, I wasn't tossing it around lightly. I did suppose you were, Dawson said, but you wouldn't be required ever to see the mag tapes, let alone touch them. That would have a risk that only Ogden would have to take. They could convict you of nothing more than serious negligence for permitting or overlooking the gap in security. Even so, I'd be forced into early retirement or drummed out of the service with only a partial pension. Amazed, Dawson shook his head and said, I'm offering him 1/3 of a partnership that will earn millions, and Ernest is worrying about a government pension. Salisbury was perspiring heavily. The back of his shirt was soaked and felt like a cold compress against his skin. To Klinger, he said, you told us that you can do it, but the big question is whether you will do it. Klinger stared into the brandy glass for a while, then finally looked up at Salisbury and said, once you've perfected the drug, what's our first step? Getting to his feet. Dawson said, we'll establish a front corporation in Liechtenstein. Why there? Liechtenstein does not require that a corporation lists its true owners. Dawson could hire lawyers in Vandus and airport, appoint them as corporate officers, and they could not be forced by law to reveal the identities of their clients. Furthermore, Dawson said, I will require for each of us a set of forged papers complete with passports so that we can travel and do business under assumed names. If the lawyers in Vandus are forced by extra legal means to reveal the names of their clients, they still won't endanger us because they won't know our real names. Dawson's caution was not excessive. The corporation would quite rapidly become an incredibly successful venture, so successful that a great many powerful people in both business and government would eventually be prying at it quietly, trying to find out who lay behind the phony office in Vaduz. With Salisbury's drug and extensive programs of carefully structured subliminals, the three of them could establish 100 different businesses and literally demand that customers, associates, and even rival producers a substantial profit for them. Every dollar they earned would seem to be spotlessly clean, produced by a legitimate form of commerce. But of course, a great many people would feel that it was not at all legitimate to manipulate the competition and the buying public by means of a powerful new drug. In the event that the corporation got caught using the drug, stolen as it was from a US weapons research project, what had once appeared to be excessive caution might well prove no more than adequate. And once we've got the corporation, Klinger asked, money and business arrangements were Dawson's vacation and his avocation. He began to declaim almost in the manner of a baptism preacher, full of vigor and fierce intent, thoroughly enjoying himself. The corporation will purchase our walled estate somewhere in Germany or France, at least 100 acres. On the surface, it will appear to be an executive retreat, but in reality, it will be used for the indoctrination of mercenary soldiers. Mercenaries? Klinger's hard-broad face expressed the institutional soldier's disdain for the freelancer. The corporation, Dawson explained, would hire perhaps a dozen of the very best mercenaries available, men who had fought in Asia and Africa. They would be brought to the company's estate ostensibly to be briefed on their assignments and to meet their superiors. The water supply and all bottled beverage on the state would be used as media for the drug. 24 hours after the mercenaries had taken their first few drinks, when they were primed for total subliminal brainwashing, they would be shown 4 hours of film on each of their 3 successive days, travel logs, industrial studies, and technical documentaries detailing the use of a variety of weapons and electronic devices, which would be presented as essential background material for the assignments. Unknowingly, of course, they would be watching 12 hours of sophisticated subliminal selling to obey without question any order prefaced by a certain code phrase, and when those 3 days had passed, all 12 men would cease to be merely hired hands and would have become something quite like programmed robots. Outwardly, they would not appear to have changed. They would look and behave as they always had done. Nevertheless, they would obey any order to lie, steal, or kill anyone. Obey without hesitation, so long as the order was preceded by the proper code phrase. As mercenary soldiers, they would be professional killers to begin with, Klinger said. That's true, Dawson said, but the glory lies in the unconditional, unquestioning obedience. As hired mercenaries, they would be able to reject any order to our assignment that they didn't like. But as our program staff, they will do precisely what they were told to do. There are other advantages too, Salisbury said, not unaware that Dawson, now that he was in a proselytized mood, resented being nudged from the pulpit. For one thing, you can order a man to kill and then to erase all memory of the murder from both his conscious and subconscious mind. He would never be able to testify against the corporation or against us, and he would pass any polygraph examination. Klinger's Nathaniel face brightened a bit. He appreciated the importance of what Salisbury had said. Even if they had used pentothal or hypnotic regression, he still couldn't remember. Sodium pentothal is much overrated as a true serum, Salisbury said. As for the other world, they could put him in a trance and regress him in the time of the murder, but he would only draw a blank. Once has been told to erase the from his mind, it is beyond his recall, just as surely as obsolete data is beyond the recall of a computer that has had its memory banks wiped clean. Having finished his second brandy, Klinger returned to the bar cart. This time he filled a 12-ounce tumbler with ice and 7-Up. Salisbury thought, he's right about that. Any man who doesn't keep a clear head here tonight is plainly suicidal. To Dawson, Klinger said, once we've got these 12 robots, what do we do with them? Because he had spent the last 3 months thinking about that while he and Salisbury worked out the details of the approach to the general, Dawson had a quick answer. We can do anything we want with them, anything at all. But at first step, I thought we might use them to introduce the drug into the water supply of every major city in Kuwait. Then we would saturate the country with a multimedia subliminal campaign specifically structured for the Arab psyche, and within a month we would quietly seize control without anyone, even the government of Kuwait, knowing what we'd done. Take over our entire country as a first step, Klinger asked incredulously. Preaching again, striding back and forth between Salisbury and the general, gesturing expansively, Dawson said, the population of Kuwait is less than 800,000. The greatest part that is concentrated in a few urban areas, chiefly in Hawali and the capital city. Furthermore, all of the members of the government and virtually all of the wealthy reside in those metropolitan centres. The handful of super-rich families who own desert enclaves get their water by truck from their cities. In short, we could take control of everyone of influence within the country and give us a behind-the-scenes managerial dictatorship over the Kuwait's oil reserves, which compose 20% of the entire world supply. That done, Kuwait could become our base of operation from which we could subvert Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Yemen, and every other oil exporting nation in the Mideast. We could smash the OPEC cartel, Klinger said thoughtfully, or strengthen it, Dawson said, or alternatively weaken and strengthen it in order to cause major fluctuation in the value of oil stocks. Indeed, we could affect the entire stock market, and because we'd known about each fluctuation well in advance, we could take rare advantage of it. Within a year, by assuming control of a half dozen Mid-Eastern countries, we should be able to siphon $1.5 billion into the corporation in Liechtenstein. Thereafter, it will be a matter of no more than 5 or 6 years until everything, quite literally everything, is ours. It sounds crazy, mad, Klinger said. Dawson frowned. Mad? Incredible, unbelievable, impossible, the general said, clarifying his first statement when he saw that it disturbed Dawson. There was a time when heavier than air flight seemed impossible, Salisbury said. The nuclear bomb seemed incredible to many people even after it was dropped on Japan. And in 1961, when Kennedy launched the Apollo space program, very few Americans believed that a man could ever walk on the moon. They stared at one another. The silence in the room was so perfect that each tiny wave breaking against the boat dock, although it was little more than a gentle ripple, was muffled by the window, sounding like an ocean surf. At least it did to Salisbury. It reverberated within his nearly fevered mind. Finally, Dawson said, Ernest, will you help us get those magnetic tapes? Klinger looked at Dawson for a long moment, then at Salisbury. A shudder, either of fear or pleasure. Ogden could not be certain which passed through him. He said, I'll help. Ogden signed champagne? Dawson asked. It's a bit crude after brandy, but I believe we should raise a toast to one another and to the project. 15 minutes later, after our servant had brought a chilled bottle of Moet et Chandon, and he had uncorked it after the three of them had tasted success, Klinger smiled at Dawson and said, what if I'd been terrified of this drug? What if I thought your offer was more than I could handle? I know you will, Ernest, Dawson said, perhaps better than you think I do. I'd be surprised if there was anything that you couldn't handle. But suppose I'd balk for whatever reason. Suppose I hadn't wanted to come in with you. Dawson rolled some champagne over his tongue, swallowed, inhaled through his mouth to savour the aftertaste, and said, then you wouldn't have left this estate alive, Ernest. I'm afraid you'd have an accident, which you arranged for a week ago. Really that. I knew you wouldn't disappoint me. You came with a gun, Dawson said. A 32 automatic. It doesn't show. It's taped to the small of my back. You practiced drawing it? I can have it in my hand in less than 5 seconds. Dawson nodded approval. And you would have used me as a shield to get off the estate. I would have tried. They both laughed and regarded each other with something very near to affection. They would delight with themselves. Jesus Christ, Salisbury thought. He nervously sipped his champagne. Thanks for listening.